at Hanford, they produced the plutonium. So the uranium for Little Boy was made in Oak Ridge, and then the plutonium for Fat Man was from Hanford. So
and there's still some top secret things going on up there, because I was in martial arts. I got into martial arts a little late, almost middle age, because I was in my 40s. And,
yeah, I did a little bit of that too later on. Yeah.
And one of my instructors there, he and I like to tell, I tried to whip him when I got better at it. Never did. He's a master. He's a master now. But anyway, I asked him what he did in Oak Ridge, and he says, "If I tell you, I'll probably have to kill you." So I didn't want to know anymore.
yeah, that's enough. Yeah. Well, James, we're coming at the bottom of the hour, and probably need to take a short break here. I appreciate you coming on, and let me know how your high school reunion goes, and if any of your other football players know anything about that incident over the football field. So.
I don't want to come over like a jock. I was in high school and college. I had a pretty good grade point average. I was I graduated with a 3.7 and in high school, and I forget what it was, but I was like a B+ in college, and I was working and going to college too. So I'm no dumb. And by the way, I took physics in college, I worked under a guy, believe it or not, who worked with Von Braun and some of those guys at Redstone. My
Redstone Arsenal, yeah.
Yes, his name was Archie Mullins, and of course, he was talking about going to the moon before we got there when I was in college. So obviously, we had to call him Moon Mullins, but he was one smart guy. This was before calculators. This was before computers, and we worked with slide rules. And he had a giant slide rule at the front of the physics class, and he'd run back and forth and changing that slide rule before I could get the same answer with my slide rule, the one I had carried on my hip. And so he was a delightful fellow too. But his projections on going to the moon and everything was right on the money. How much thrust it would take and all of that. So he knew what he was talking about. And I went to his class for a little while, but he had quite a sense of humor. I thought he was German for first 5 or 6 classes I went to, but actually he was a boy from Alabama. He had worked with Von Braun and Green and all those guys, and that might have got him fired. I don't know if they called him mimicking him. I don't know, but he was one brilliant fellow, and so it was a matter of knowing, and I think he knew, because he would get certain questions that he wouldn't answer. You know what I'm talking about? He would dodge them or sidestep them. Even then. But he was one of the most brilliant people I've ever had as an instructor, if not the most brilliant. And would you believe he was teaching at kind of a little small private college? I went to the University of Tennessee too, but this was a place. This was a little. This was a private school called Carson Newman College, which was a Baptist college for all intents and purposes. And he occasionally would mention unknown flying objects and things like that, but he never was specific. He just hinted.
Right.
But he had. Okay. What I'm saying, I thought he was privileged to information that the rest of us didn't have.
Yeah, quite likely. Well, James, we need to close for the hour, and appreciate you being with us, and let's keep in touch.
Well, that sounds good to me. I got a load off my chest tonight because.
Okay. We appreciate your time.
I had not talked publicly about this to anybody until I talked with you this evening.
Well, you have now. So, okay, James. Well, you have a good evening, and we'll talk soon.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, James. Good night.
Bye.
Well, that was James Clarkson, not to be confused with the James Clarkson in Washington State, who did some work on Roswell in regards to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. We're going to take a short break. for a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back, take some more calls, and I'll discuss some other cases. So stay tuned, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Hi, this is William Puckett, your host of the weekly Inception Radio Network program, and believe it or not, we got another guest, another James Clarkson. This is a James Clarkson that the other James Clarkson was talking about in Washington State, and James has had some first-hand experience with a witness privy to some information about flying saucers at Wright-Patterson Field, association with the Roswell incident, 1947. James, good evening. How you doing out there in Olympia, Washington?
Well, actually, it's cold and wet, and it's good to talk to you, Bill.
Yeah, good to talk to you. We were talking a little bit about Wright-Pat Field with this other James Clarkson. He was a journalist, worked for UPI, was news director for a TV station and everything. And one of our chat room people asked him about if he was knew anything about black projects at Wright-Pat Field, and he knew you knew about that. But why don't you go ahead and tell us? I know you've done a lot of work with this lady that was a secretary up there, and I think she's been deceased for a few years. But go ahead and kind of fill us in on that a little bit.
Well, I can just give you, in a nutshell, it's an extraordinary series of coincidences. I met June Crane originally in 1993 when she approached me after I was giving a presentation in the Ocean Shores, Washington Library. And she was a very determined older lady who came up and told me that the government knew all about UFOs and that they were keeping it a secret. And I tried to get more information out of her. She wouldn't talk to me, and actually she was very stubborn, and she would not talk to me about it for 4 years. And it wasn't until after the Phoenix Lights, and specifically after the Phoenix Lights and right before the 50th anniversary of Roswell, when CNN had big coverage on Roswell Case Closed, that June called me up and told me that she had decided that she didn't care anymore. She was just going to tell me her entire life story. So after researching with her background, she gave me all her personal papers. I interviewed her numerous times, and I also became her friend along the way. She revealed to me not only that there are two sides to the Air Force. In other words, there's the side that they show the public, where they say, oh no, we did our best in Project Blue Book, and, of course, eventually, years after she left, they closed it down, and they said that no UFOs were ever a threat to the United States, etc. And then there's the side of what the scientists and engineers talk about behind closed doors, and that's an entirely different conversation. And she explained to me how strict the security is when you work in that kind of environment. And one of the main reasons that I know that she knew what she was talking about were the papers that she gave me, and also the fact that she was able to tell me about, in particular, one project called Project Caucasian, that at the time that she revealed to me that code name and told me a little bit about it, there was no information available to the public on that project anywhere. This was a black project. I mean, it was top secret, and there was no way you were going to find out about it out here. So clearly she knew a lot about particular projects and a lot about how high security works. And she pointed out that, you can't even go to an office function, any kind of office party, without it being under security. Many times she couldn't bring her spouse to various events. You can't talk about any of this when you're off work. Everything is restricted. Where she worked, they even had to lock up the typewriter ribbons at night. Now, of course, for those who are not quite as old as perhaps I am, who may not remember what a typewriter was. Yes. But there was a huge fear that enemy agents could get a hold of your typewriter ribbon and that they would then know all of your keystrokes. So those items had to be locked up. She even explained to me how she got in trouble for leaving one piece of paper in her desk that should have been locked up. And her job was to operate safes and to take classified documents in and out, and they were only to be given to a person with the right security clearance who was on a need-to-know list for that particular project. So she did very important work, and she explained to me over and over again how strict it is to work in that kind of environment when it comes to security.
What was this Project Caucasian? I'm not familiar with that.
Well, here's the bottom line on that. Several years later, unfortunately after June passed away in 1998, it was I believe it was about 2001 or so, the project was declassified, and the details were revealed under a public disclosure, Freedom of Information. Project Caucasian referred to the parachute harness system that Wright-Patterson was required to develop so that when a bomber dropped a hydrogen bomb, this device would slow down the fall of the bomb long enough for the bomber to get out of range before it went off. So needless to say, there's a lot of engineering because we're talking about a very heavy payload, and since it concerned a nuclear weapon at that time, this was extremely classified work.
Right, and that's interesting that project, she knew about that before it was declassified. That's certainly, well, I know when I first went to a MUFON meeting up there in Woodinville, Washington, you made a presentation on June Crane, and I saw you had all the papers of her and photos and everything, and certainly looked legit to me, that she indeed was there. And were you ever going to write a book on that? Did you have the public?
Actually, I did.
Uh-huh.
I'm never quite clear on who I've caught up with what aspect of what's going on, because we all lead such complicated lives. And yes, I did publish a book called Tell My Story, June Crane, the Air Force, and UFOs. And since I get to plug my book, it is available on Amazon in Kindle format, or you can contact me through my website, and I will arrange to get you a copy.
Okay. Are the paper copies available on Amazon? Do you know?
No, and they charge too much money for me to do that, to be honest. I'm a small author and trying to keep the economics of this pretty simple.
Here's I got a question here from the chat room for you, James. Do any of these declassified projects have a paper trail on contractors or military personnel who worked on them, or does a level of information remain classified? I don't know. I
would say the answer to that is yes and no. And the reason I say that is anybody who's done a Freedom of Information Act request with the U.S. government, it's a bit like trying to interview the Sphinx. You have to.
I can attest to that. Yeah.
You have to phrase your question. You have to be really, really careful how you phrase your question, because they will only give you exactly what you ask for. And so if you wanted to pursue a particular project, once you knew that, in other words, it's sort of like when you get to the point where they know that you know about the project and that you're seriously researching it, you would ask specifically, to identify contractor, and you want to be as specific as possible, because what happens is if you burden them with too extensive of a search, they will charge you an exorbitant amount of money, or they will deny your request, or they will tie it up in red tape forever. So if you want to make it a request, you want to be very specific about what you're asking for. I asked for June Crane's civilian personnel file, I think, four or five times, and at first they told me that it didn't even exist, and we went round and round like that, and then all at once one day in the mail came this huge envelope, and it had photocopies of all the documents in her record. Now this basically for me was a verification because I already possessed the originals, and those were the ones that June gave me herself that she had kept all these years.
Did you get that from the Air Force Record Center in St. Louis, by the way? Is that where you got it?
I'm trying to remember
Military
what city it was.
Record Center?
Well, see, she was a civilian employee. She was never enlisted or commissioned in the military.
Oh, she wasn't in the... Yeah, okay. I didn't know that. I thought she was actually in the military. Okay. All right, I got you. Okay. Yeah, because there's another case I may talk about tonight if I had time, and I obtained this guy's Air Force discharge papers and where he was and everything, and I think it's the Military Record Center in St. Louis where I got that. So okay, well that's good to know. That's more confirmation. You certainly dotted your I's and crossed your T's on this one. I mean, it's certainly the real deal, and that's interesting. Well, appreciate you coming on, James. I'll get back to you on, I haven't listened to your voicemail or anything. I may have to call you tomorrow. Is that okay?
That's fine, except that I think I've got a phone call in the evening coming in that may tie me up for a while.
Okay.
But we will touch base. I did send you email already about...
Oh, okay. You sent me an email.
First
okay.
case.
I'll touch base with you on that. I really appreciate the help.
Anytime.
Okay,
and thank
James.
you for this opportunity.
Yes, and thanks for coming on.
Okay,
right.
You have a good night.
Okay, you too, James. Bye.
Bye now.
Okay, well, that was kind of a last-minute thing. James Clarkson, he too is an investigator with EPIC, which is the Extraordinary Phenomena Investigation Committee, and some interesting UFO cases out there in Washington State. James is looking into those for me, and we'll be discussing those results. Certainly they'll be up on my site soon, so some pretty interesting cases. I mentioned when James and I were talking about where he got June Crane's records, and the reason I brought that up is a case I'm going to discuss if we have the time here. We're getting low on time. Where the alleged meeting of President John F. Kennedy with this veteran that I was in touch with for several years said that at the time he didn't know what it was, and now in retrospect he said it was an ET, it wasn't a human. And to give you a little background on that, this happened right around 2001. The MUFON case management system, which is a system where people can report UFO sightings just like you can to my site, which is ufosnw.com, reported this case, and at that time I wasn't privy to witness information because I wasn't a certified investigator, but in a nutshell, he said he was a still photographer at Adar Station, which is in Corvallis, Oregon. That particular base was decommissioned, I think, sometime in the 1960s, late 60s. Well, this happened in 1963, a couple months before the president was shot in Dallas. And he was a still photographer. Corvallis was not a regular base as far as aircraft, but it was a top secret surveillance station. And he had a crypto clearance, and he was a still photographer, just like was mentioned earlier in an earlier interview with the other James Clarkson. He talked about a military still photographer. Well, he said that in the middle of the night he was awakened and taken to a close-by airport and flown for what he estimated about 2 to 3 hours, close to 3 hours, and he was supposed to take some photos, and at the time they didn't tell him what the photos would be, and it was, when he got off the plane, it was President John F. Kennedy, and there was a flying saucer parked off the runway, this with a ladder coming down out of it, and this tall being, which he said was about a head taller than President Kennedy, was talking to it, this thing. And there were 2 plainclothesmen, he said, that had sidearms, and then a pilot. And they told him to take photos and to not talk about it at all, and then they were going to go get the photos developed, and then they'd be on their way. Well, anyhow, he took several photos. They got back on the plane. He didn't know where they were, anything, and they flew back to Corvallis. The plainclothesman accompanied him back to the base. He developed the film. They took all the photos, and they told him that to never talk about this. He could be discharged or court-martialed. So that's what happened. And then how I got involved is I started writing letters and emails to this gentleman, and he gave me his Air Force identification number, and I wrote to the Military Records Center in St. Louis, and several months later, 2 or 3 months later, I got this package, and it showed it verified everything. He was a still photographer. He was at Adair Station in September 1963 when this happened. So it all checked out, everything he told me as far as his military experience. He said that at the time he was writing to me, he had serious physical problems. I believe he had a severe aneurysm and didn't know if he was going to live much longer, and he wanted to essentially get this off his chest. So I had several communiques with him, and he just talked about a number of details. He didn't know where the station was. But I did some analysis, and I determined that it could have been Area 51. It could have been Norton Air Force Base, which is another decommissioned base in California that was super top secret. And a lot of people had seen flying saucers there, and that too was decommissioned in the late 60s. It could have been Edwards Air Force Base. And also the Kennedys, I found out from someone that knew them, had their own private airport in California, and they thought that it might have been there. Well, I did some other work. I did a lot of work. I spent a lot of money in this case. I wrote to the Kennedy Library, and I wanted to find out where President Kennedy officially was in that period of time, and I was never able to place him west of the Mississippi. I got all his itinerary, Air Force One. I'm trying to remember the colonel that was pilot. Actually, it was a general, and it's on my website. Anyhow, General Godfrey was his first name. I can't think of his last name. Anyhow, I got all his itinerary, and I couldn't place him west of the Mississippi, but a few years later, I got this email from this gentleman, and they said, well, the Kennedy Library is now on the website, and I found out Kennedy was all over the western U.S. at that time. He was not on Air Force One, but he was taking a tour of the Conservation Corps, which I believe he spearheaded. He was in Washington State twice. He was in Montana a couple times, Utah, California, and Nevada, and all in that time period where this happened. So, I don't know, you can connect the dots here and say, did Kennedy meet with an ET? Maybe. President Eisenhower allegedly had a meeting. But that's kind of the story. You can read more of that by going to my site, www.ufosnw.com. You can also go to the EPIC Voyager site, which is www.epicvoyagers.com. And you can listen to an archive of this broadcast on the InceptionRadioNetwork.com. And so we're at the bottom of the hour, or I'm sorry, at the bottom of the broadcast, 90 minutes. It's time to close. And so read about these cases on my site. I've got links to all those for tonight's radio program. And enjoy. So with that, we're going to close. And this is William Puckett from Helena, Montana, saying good night.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Please join us again next Monday evening for Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council's EPIC Voyages. I'm Roger Peacock for EPIC. Until next time.